Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for a really interesting session, we hope, on the voluntary carbon market and what you need to know. As you can see, we've got quite a panel in front of us today because today is really going to be a discussion, not just going through some slides, not just lecturing you. We really want to have a conversation today and answer many of those very pressing questions that we have. So let's take a look first. Who is in front of you? What are we talking about today? Now, who have you got in front of you today? We're going to start by presenting who we are, and then Alena is going to walk us through exactly who is ClimatePartner Impact so that you know who you're spending the next hour of your day with. Let me start with myself. My name is Oria Palmer. I am a sales manager in our environmental markets team, meaning that I am often one of the first people that you come in contact with, and I help to really assess your needs as a company. Where are you on your climate action journey? What needs do you have? What preferences do you have? And if we're looking at putting together a portfolio from the carbon markets together for you, are you at a stage where project development is interesting? Are you just looking at the voluntary carbon market? And I can help you assess your needs and what is the journey that makes the most sense for you. Sofia, could you say a few words about yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Sofia Johnson Veloso, and I am a carbon market analyst for ClimatePartner. So I work in the background most of the time, and I support all of my amazing colleagues with carbon market knowledge. And today I will also be sharing it with you.
Great. Yes, you do. I learn from you all the time. It's fabulous to have you on the panel today. Robin, can you go next?
Sure. So my name is Robin Stoffers. I'm Managing Director of ClimatePartner Impact, and I'm mainly enabling our great teams in project development and partnerships and Earth observation and all the teams which are necessary to make our projects so impactful, and also to consult our clients investing in those projects. So this is pretty much what I'm doing every day with a lot of passion for those projects.
Yes, it is. I've been working with Robin for many years, and that is 100% true. Lots of passion behind moving all of this forward. Alena, can you share about yourself and then about ClimatePartner Impact as a whole?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And hi, everyone. My name is Alena Miles. I'm the Partnership Manager with ClimatePartner Impact. And in my role, I speak to corporate and financial clients who are interested in making an impact and contributing to global net zero. So today, I will be delighted to share the perspective of clients that I talk to, the questions that they ask, the concerns that they have, the themes and trends that I see. All of that, I'll be happy to answer any of your questions on. And by the way, a huge thank you to everyone who submitted questions before the session today. We will be absolutely sure to cover all of those questions. But if you haven't had a chance to submit your questions yet, as Oria has said, please do so. We'll be really happy to cover any tricky questions from you. Before we talk about the questions, we've got some really good ones that we will answer, as well as some additional ones. What I wanted to quickly start with is explain who we are and why we are well positioned to talk about voluntary carbon market. What is our expertise and what is our experience? So many of you are familiar with ClimatePartner Group. We have been around for a couple of decades now. And our focus is end-to-end climate solutions provider. So we have offices all around Europe and also in the US. We have over 500 climate experts in those offices working with over 6,000 corporate clients and offering support on every step of their climate action journey, including carbon markets and carbon strategy. So we have a lot of expertise, a lot of competencies in this space. And a couple of years ago, the ClimatePartner Group realized that what they really wanted to have access to is an in-house project developer so that we can offer our clients the highest quality, most transparent carbon projects that are available. And that's how ClimatePartner Impact was created. So we are an end-to-end climate project developer. We do every single step of these projects on the ground in our head office in Munich as well. So today we are really excited to share our insights with you. But just to give you a bit of an idea of our portfolio and what we're working on, at the moment, as we speak, we have 17 projects in 10 different countries, focusing on restoring 16,000 hectares of highly degraded land all around the world. We've got $100 million committed to our projects, and we are expecting 10 million tons of verified emission reductions or carbon credits out of those projects, the majority of which, 8 million, are carbon removal credits. So that's us. But what I do want to say, which is very, very important to us and a really big part of our DNA, is that environment is absolutely a huge focus area for us, but equally as important are the social impacts and empowering local communities. And that's why our mission is really twofold. It is to develop innovative carbon projects and generally climate projects, but we're really focusing on both the positive environmental impact and the social impacts that empower local communities. So that's us. Hopefully this introduction wasn't too long, but it gave you a bit of an idea of our background and why we're so passionate about this space. And now I will head over to Oria, who's going to start asking us all the tricky questions that you've been submitting. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Alena. Yes, it's nice to have a bit of a background of who we are and you know, what positions us to be here to answer these kind of questions. And that's why I'd like to start with Robin, as the head of Climate Partner Impact, with our first question, which I think is something quite poignant, is actually what is the place of the voluntary carbon market in climate action? Why are we not just focusing on internal reductions? What do we actually need this whole mechanism for?
I think answering this question, we really need to look where we stand in the climate system, right? The climate system does not care where those emissions are generated. It's a whole system globally, and we are not able today to really understand all the interlinks. We see, like the last year, it was super about droughts and wildfires in the Mediterranean, for example. Recently, there were like a lot of floodings. So those climate systems, they are super, super complex. And it's not about only that we clean up our own mess and what we had emitted. Currently, it's really about also looking over like our own value chain. And the VCM is a perfect instrument, and it's proven, right? It's like the VCM exists since decades, and it's a result-based mechanism where we implement nice projects, no matter which technology. It can be like renewable energies, it can be reforestation activities, it can be more social activities. And in the end, all those activities help to reduce or sequester carbon. And this is what I mean by saying it's not enough that we only look at our own value chain. We really have to go beyond and also enable other communities, other regions, which are maybe disconnected from the international finance streams, because no one would like to invest in those countries to help them to get over the stage, not to make the same mistakes as we centuries ago. It's really the VCM can have an impact when saying we help third world countries and countries in the global south really to overcome those challenges and work on climate resilience, but also on new technologies. And the VCM is a perfect instrument on that to channel finance from the global north to the global south and have actually a impact on the poorest parts of society, which mainly was actually caused by us. So it's now about giving something back, but it's also about making a livable planet from all those investments and our commitments we are having in the global south.
Great, thanks, Robin. I think that really summarizes quite perfectly what the point of all of this is and what the greater action here can benefit. Sofia, can I ask you, what is actually happening in the voluntary carbon market at the moment? Like the trends, the developments, what are we seeing that's going on that's influencing what Robin has just told us?
Okay, yes. So the voluntary carbon market has gone over quite a long period of change over the past couple of years. So this is not a new market. It's existed for a long time, more than 20 years. But after the signing of the Paris Agreement, so after 2015, things started happening a little bit in the world overall, where there was an increased focus on sustainability within the corporate sector. And that really boosted the voluntary carbon market, which we are operating in. So the market started experiencing quite a bit of growth at around the time of the Paris Agreement or a few years after. And things started happening very quickly. There started to be a lot of attention onto the market. And when things started growing around that time, that was also a time when there was a lot of areas that were identified that we can improve on and that we can develop further, and that has a lot of potential to be better than they have been in the market in the past. So after that, we've started seeing an area of growth in the market, not in terms of size, but in terms of quality, in terms of depth of the market. So the market is really maturing and becoming more complex than it has been historically. So we are seeing lots of areas of improvement on the voluntary carbon across the board. We're seeing increases in integrity regulations. We're seeing more players entering the market, not just in terms of the number of players, but also the width of players. We've got new types of actors that exist on the market today that didn't exist a few years ago. So we're seeing rating agencies, we're seeing research bodies, we're seeing all sorts of organizations that are entering the market now and providing this ecosystem a growth in width, so to say, making it more comprehensive and complex. So that's really what's been happening over the past couple of years. And another thing that's been happening recently with the growth of the market and the increased attention and the increased complexity on the market, we've also seen a lot of new regulation and policy emerging. So we've seen lots of governments across the world looking to integrate the voluntary carbon market into their existing regulatory systems. And this is a really positive change. This means that the voluntary carbon market is being recognized by these jurisdictions. And it means that we get to operate within a regulatory framework which gives both confidence and assurance to the markets to operate in a much more structured way. And then, so these kind of developments that we're seeing, they're really covering all aspects of the market. They're covering guidances and regulations around project development. They are covering trade regulations, buyer guidance and buyer regulations, compliance regulations against the path towards net zero, best practice guidance on how to claim your activities, and many, many more things. And there's lots of examples of this that you might have heard of. There is the CORSIA framework, which is for the aviation industry. There is the Science-Based Target Initiative that's providing guidance and regulation on the market. There is the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative that provides guidance on claims. And there is the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, which regulates the projects themselves. And during this time of change, this time of sort of growth within the market and kind of establishing the market to a more structured system, we did see that crazy rapid growth that we saw directly after the signing of the Paris Agreement kind of like level out a little bit during this phase of kind of settling ourselves in this new world. And now that we're seeing all of these increased regulations and also an incorporation of the voluntary carbon market onto regulatory systems and compliance markets and semi-compliance markets like CORSIA, we're also expecting that that growth to kind of start again once these regulatory requirements are starting to come into place. And then kind of bringing all of those points together, pricing on the market is also kind of expected to increase, and that is coming as an effect of increased quality. If you're doing projects that have more stringent requirements and higher quality, you can expect that it will cost a little bit more to implement those projects. There's an expectation of it increases in demand and more stringent requirements, which would also push up the price. So that's kind of the expectations going forward as well.
Well, that sounds like quite a lot is going on at the moment, and really great to hear that there's that much improvement in the quality, and that is really one of the main trends that's going on at the moment there. Then if I could move across to Alena, then what are you seeing from the client side as a response? Sofia's just told us that, you know, the quality is going up. We're expecting a bit of a ramp up in prices as people are jumping back into the market again. What are you seeing from the client side? What's the reaction here?
Yeah, pretty consistent to what Sofia has described. I think we've had some scandals in the market and some really not so good outcomes. So what has been really strong is the fear of greenwashing accusations. So many companies really terrified of doing something wrong. A small portion of them to the point where they're just paralyzed and are doing absolutely nothing. But luckily, it's a very small portion. Quite a large portion, interestingly enough, are doing amazing things, both internally within their own value chain and externally, but actually are not communicating it at all because they're so worried about someone finding something that's not 100% perfect with their initiatives and getting criticized. So I'm sure we've all heard the term green hushing, and it really does exist. So that I see quite a bit. And it makes me honestly very, very sad because I think, you know, if we want to get to global net zero, we need absolutely every tool available right now, not in the future. So if we're sitting around waiting for a perfect solution being implemented in the perfect timeline, absolutely perfectly, nothing will ever happen. So that's one of the trends I see. But luckily, again, that's not a huge part of the client base that I'm talking to. I'm really lucky because the clients I'm talking to are really, really passionate about making an impact and contributing to global net zero. So what I'm seeing, and consistent to what Sofia has said, the quality is improving in the market, which brings back a lot of the confidence. And also with that, it also brings a lot more understanding of the market for our clients. So I'm finding that the clients are much better informed. Many clients that we work with will have a team member, for example, in their sustainability team that specifically looks after the voluntary carbon market engagement, sometimes the whole team that does so. Or many other clients that don't have that capability will have external consultants that they'll work with. So they're getting a lot better informed, either internally or they outsource that function. So that's really, really great to see. And then the other point I will mention, which I think is really, really important, is there seems to be sometimes this perception in the market that companies are either decarbonizing internally or going out and buying carbon credits. And that's definitely not our experience at all. In our experience, companies are doing both very, very strongly. But I think our experience aside, what I did want to mention today is some independent studies that have been done in this space. And there was a huge research done last year by MSCI, where they looked at the data of 4,000 global companies. And what they looked at is their internal, the rate of their internal decarbonization, and whether it is in any way correlated with being significant players in voluntary carbon markets and buying carbon credits. And what was interesting and unsurprising to us is that the companies that are significantly involved in voluntary carbon markets, on average, are decarbonizing at least twice the rate of the companies that are not involved in the carbon markets. So if anyone wants a copy of the study, please let me know. But I think it once again just debunks this myth that is out there that companies are doing one or the other. That's not what we're seeing at all. The other cool thing that we're seeing is that there are some really big market leaders, particularly large tech companies, going out there and making huge commitments to this market. I'm sure some people would have heard of a coalition, a buyers coalition that Microsoft, Meta, Google, and Salesforce have created. So they created this combined buyers coalition called Symbiosis, where they've said, we're going to commit to 20 million tons of nature-based solutions by 2030. And that's really cool to see because they're real market leaders. And I think it gives us a bit of a idea of where that trend is going. And that's really, really amazing. But I think what's even more exciting is that we have quite a few much smaller companies also come to talk to us that really want to be involved and really want to contribute and make an impact.
Thanks. I can absolutely reiterate what you're saying there. Also being client-facing myself, those clients coming in wanting to make the biggest contribution are the ones who are already far along the road with their own reductions in-house, with science-based targets set, with an active reduction roadmap in place, and that it's really both happening simultaneously is what we are seeing from the end clients. So absolutely agree with you there, and glad finally there's a study to back up what we've been seeing over the years. Good to have those numbers behind it. Now, we've been talking about what is the market doing and how are the clients reacting. Sofia, can you help us with some ultimate guidance to sort of offsetting compensation at the moment? What is really the latest recommendation?
That's a difficult question for me to answer, but I'll do my very best. Basically, the market, there is a lot of different views available on the market, and as a company, you absolutely have to look at the available guidance and look at the different views and make an internal decision what is best for you and your internal strategy. But as a general rule, or maybe the comments that I can provide here is that historically, the voluntary carbon market has used a narrative which is the offsetting narrative and the carbon neutrality narrative. This is a narrative which has received some criticism over the past couple of years. And as a result of that criticism, there has been alternatives offered, or there are alternatives in development, let's say that. But the general guidance kind of remains the same. The first step, obviously, for all companies is to find out what their actual negative impact on the world is, measure their emissions, and make a plan on how to reduce those emissions internally and implement those reduction measures. This is essential steps that the companies should complete no matter what. And then in addition to that, it is important to still finance global mitigation of emissions outside of the own company value chain. And this is what the voluntary carbon market can offer. And with one of the options, it is the offsetting narrative. And with that narrative, basically what you do is that you utilize the mechanisms available on the voluntary carbon market to buy carbon credits. And the carbon credits that you buy, they finance the underlying project, which is how you create the amazing positive impact on the world that you want to accomplish. And then you tell the story of what you did. And with the offsetting narrative, the story that you're telling is focusing on yourself as a company. So you have an internal focus and you look at how the emission reductions that you produced compensate for the emissions that you have as a company. So you're really focusing on yourself and your own activities and sort of your own net impact on the world. The new alternative, which is the contribution narrative, doesn't change any of the previous steps that companies should go through, but it only changes the storyline that you tell at the end. And in exactly the same way, you use the voluntary carbon market as a mechanism to funnel finance into the projects that you want to support. So you buy carbon credits from the projects that you want to give finance. You support those projects through this mechanism. And then the story that you tell after is what differs, what changes. And that story has an external focus. So what you are as a company is not relevant here. What you do as a company is not exactly relevant here. But what is important is the support that you provided to that project and what that support has the opportunity to accomplish or what it already did accomplish. So you focus on the outcomes of the project and the contributing activity that you did. So it's simply a different story. It's a different narrative that you're telling. And I think what is the latest guidance was the question. I can't tell exactly what is the right decision to take here. That needs to be an internal decision within the company. But I would say the latest guidance is complete a holistic sustainability strategy for yourself as a company. And then when you come to the step of creating a bigger impact than yourself outside of your own value chain and taking those extra steps to do something positive for the world, then you need to think about the story that you want to tell and what you want the focus of that story to be.
Great. Thank you. I think that's a very important message for us to take with us is what is it that you're trying to achieve on a larger scale with these two different approaches that Sofia was explaining. You know, if we're looking at the ton for ton, it is a direct taking responsibility for your actions. But when you start talking about contribution, you no longer have to necessarily look for the ton you can afford. You can look for the ton you want to support as a concept. And that's where this narrative becomes very interesting. Alena, it's now over to you, because now we've just talked about that narrative, that storytelling. What exactly is it that the client wants to talk about, and how are they doing? But now, where do these carbon credits fit into the climate strategy to get to that narrative? How are we approaching that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And just picking up on Sofia's point, it really depends on what the strategy is, right? So what is the strategy? What is the vision? That will very much influence where carbon credits will fit into that strategy. But what I wanted to do is just show you, I'll just share the presentation for just 1 minute. And I thought maybe it'll be easiest to explain where carbon credits fit in and voluntary market can fit in the context of that contribution narrative that Sofia has mentioned. I think offsetting we're all very familiar with, and I know there's still place for it, and companies are doing it. But I think what we're seeing, particularly in Europe, is many companies are also looking at this alternative. So let's see how that fits in. And in this particular slide, what I did is I used Science-Based Targets Initiative framework specifically. Science-Based Targets Initiative framework is just one of many frameworks that are out there for our clients to have a net zero target and have a framework to work within. So it's not that we're necessarily endorsing one over the other. It just so happens that many of our clients committed to Science-Based Target Initiative. So I'll just use this as one example. So to answer the question of where do carbon credits fit in and where does voluntary carbon market fit into my strategy, the answer is it depends on why you're doing it. So let me explain. For Science-Based Target Initiative specifically, there are two different reasons where a company would want to get involved in voluntary carbon markets. And many of our clients are actually doing both of those reasons, but usually it'll be one or the other. And reason number one will be that contribution narrative, so contributing to global net zero outside of their value chain. And the reason number two will be neutralization. So let's look at both of those reasons in a little bit more detail. So for Science-Based Target Initiative, you've got your internal reduction. So you've got your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And for all of those scopes, as things stand at the moment, you cannot use carbon credits to reduce against those internal goals. So it's only internal reductions that count. We had a really good question come through the question about the proposal that SBTi had earlier in the year to potentially include the use of certain carbon credits in certain scopes. But where we are now, it's just a proposal. So until such time that we get more information around it, we're basing it on the current framework. So at the moment, it's absolutely no requirement to use your carbon credits during your internal decarbonization journey. However, SBTi strongly encourages you that while you're reducing internally, that you don't just have this tunnel vision, just focusing on your internal reduction, that you look at the global situation that we find ourselves in and contribute outside of your value chain. So they call it beyond value chain mitigation, and that's this contribution piece. And I cannot overstate how important this is. So what we've got here on this graph is the pathway of your emissions. So as you can see, in this case, you've got a company with 2050 net zero commitments. So very beautifully, the graph is decreasing, the reductions are dropping. But in gray, you can actually see that whilst you're reducing, you're continuing to emit. And you're emitting a huge amount by the time you get to net zero. And don't even get me started on the conversation about your historical emissions up until today. So what many of our companies that we talk to want to do is take responsibility for their residual emissions. So they're absolutely focusing on their internal decarbonization, but they also recognize that we are not going to get anywhere near net zero if that's all we're going to do. All the Western companies focusing on their internal reductions only. We need to contribute outside of their value chain. And that's what we're seeing with this contribution approach. So companies are doing both, internally decarbonizing, but also contributing outside of their value chain. So that's sort of the first piece, why companies get involved in voluntary carbon market. The second piece is that, and this is again SBTi framework, once you have gotten to your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, comes your net zero date, SBTi recognizes that there will be a portion of your emissions which you absolutely cannot get rid of. That's just the way your business is. And that could be up to 10% of your base emissions that they call unabatable emissions. So then at that point, once you've gone through your net zero journey, you have finished, it's all done, you've still got up to 10% of unabatable emissions. And for those, SBTi says you can use permanent removal credits to offset those unabatable emissions. So it's only at that point when you can use removals to take care of those remaining emissions. So that's the second reason that companies get involved with our projects. They're looking at the market, and I think Sofia brought up some really, really interesting points. If you look at the market as it is now, we've got some huge demand drivers that are coming up in the next few years. You've got various net zero commitments by different frameworks. You've got things like internal carbon taxes in many countries where voluntary carbon market can play a role and can qualify for some of those carbon tax commitments. You've got things like CORSIA, which is the scheme for the aviation industry, whether they either have to invest in sustainable aviation fuel or invest in qualifying carbon credits. So you've got all this sort of this perfect storm of all these different demand drivers on one hand. And on the other hand, you've got the pipeline of high quality removals, which is actually quite constrained when considering those demand drivers. So companies that we work with are going, okay, we want to make sure that we can ensure that when our net zero date comes, I've got the quality, I've got the volume of the credits that I need, and it's at the price that I can count on, because there's a strong prediction that because of all these factors, the prices are going to increase quite exponentially. So that's the second reason. So either be on value chain mitigation or neutralization, but for many companies we work with, they're actually doing a bit of both.
Thanks for that. I think that this graphic is very important to understand sort of where things fit in and what an ideal pathway looks like. Now, you've just been mentioning that sort of the supply and demand side of this, and that there isn't necessarily going to be enough, and that is what is driving up the price. Now, Sofia, if I can go to you, at COP29, there was quite a lot of talk and then progress on the famous elusive Article 6. Can you walk us through what the main takeaways were from COP and how this is potentially going to help us to then get a little bit better on the supply side for this VCM?
I can absolutely do that. So COP29 was quite interesting for the voluntary carbon market and market mechanisms in general. I will absolutely mention Article 6, but I would also like to mention another development that happened, which was the adoption of the new collective quantified goal, which is a goal on climate finance. So this was the biggest ticket item on the agenda, and it agreed that developed countries will support with an agreed sum of $300 billion US. And this goal was quite low, actually, compared to what's needed, what needs to be provided in order to fuel this transition that we need. And in the text, it was discussed throughout the negotiation, it was discussed, the voluntary carbon market was mentioned, and private sector finance was mentioned as an important source of finance to fuel this transition that we need. And then the second biggest outcome of the summit was the Article 6 agreement. So Article 6 is the part of the Paris Agreement which regulates cooperative mechanisms between parties. So it contains different clauses on how parties under the Paris Agreement can work together to accomplish their mitigation goals. And Article 6.4 specifically, and Article 6.2 refers to market-based mechanisms, which the voluntary carbon market is an example of. So what happened during COP29 was that after many years of negotiations and difficulty finding agreement on this topic, they finally adopted the necessary rules and modalities required to, on one hand, have an operational carbon market mechanism under the Paris Agreement. What that means is that it's an operating standard that can issue carbon credits and that are sold onto a Paris aligned carbon market, basically. And this is a replacement of a previous market mechanism that's also from the UN, which is called the Clean Development Mechanism, which was under the Kyoto Protocol. So what happened was basically that these final little details that was necessary to make this new mechanism operational were finally agreed. And in the next year, what we can expect is for the adoption of methodologies onto this standard to happen. And once we have methodologies, that's when we can start having projects. So this is a really positive step. And then we also got agreement on several details under the Article 6.2 mechanism, which is another market-based mechanism that also sort of impacts the voluntary carbon market quite a bit. And all of the details that were agreed are quite technical, so I'm not going to go into detail on them. But in practice, what this means for us is a couple of different things. It means that market mechanisms were essentially endorsed as a mechanism to be used in order to collect finance for mitigation. And we also got a new compliance mechanism, semi-compliance mechanism that we can use and that we can operate under, and that will provide us with further guidance and further assurance on how we can move forward. There were also developments and conversations, while not part of the official negotiations, of many countries recognizing market mechanisms as a mechanism they would like to use, and also many countries recognizing the voluntary carbon market specifically, which allows us on the voluntary carbon market to use our existing systems to support those countries in achieving their NDCs. So this is just an endorsement for us that we're doing something that is actually appreciated by a lot of countries, and we can use our tools to help them, and that's what we would like to do.
Well, that is a massively positive message from a COP, finally. That does sound really good. Now that we have this great endorsement for the VCM and seeing that private companies need to help in this movement of money from where it is to where it is needed, Alena, can you help us with some kind of ballpark figure? How do we come in with this? How much should each company be contributing, and how do you come to this kind of number?
Yeah, sure. I will go back to this slide because I think how much you're going to contribute is very much going to be dependent on why you're doing it. Where does it fit within your strategy? Are you doing it for neutralization? So remember, end of net zero journey, up to 10%. That's really simple. That's basically up to 10% of your base emissions. Or are you doing it as part of a broader beyond value chain mitigation strategy? Then you have a lot more flexibility, and it's not so clear. So for the purposes of beyond value chain mitigation contribution approach, what we're seeing is there are three main ways in which companies are working out their budgets. And I'll share them, and all three are absolutely valid, and the best one really depends on what suits a particular company. So the first one is we're pretty all familiar with. It's called ton for ton, and that is, we have 10,000 tons of residual emissions this year. We're decarbonizing as much as we can, but this is what we've got left over. So we're going to go out there and going to buy 10,000 tons of high quality projects. And that's how we're going to work out our budget. It's going to still be based on tons. But the difference, as Sofia has said, is that in the contribution approach, you're not using that 10,000 tons to reduce your internal emissions, because it's really not internal. It's outside of your value chain. Rather, you are communicating quite transparently that you're contributing towards global net zero. So that's one approach. And in our experience, that is still the most common approach, because that's one that many companies are used to. What's changing here is the messaging around their contribution. The other two are becoming a lot more popular. They're still kind of a very small part of the market, but we're excited to see it kind of taking up speed, because we think that the other two approaches give you a lot more flexibility in terms of what you can do with your amount of contribution. So money for ton is kind of like a halfway point, where again, the starting point is we have 10,000 of residual emissions. But what we do is we set an internal carbon price. So let's call it $50 a ton. So we've got an internal carbon price of $50 a ton. We use it to inform our decision making. And with that $50 a ton, we set a budget of $500,000 to contribute towards high quality climate projects. And what's cool about this approach is that you remove the necessity to just have carbon credits. Suddenly you can invest in nascent technologies, biodiversity, you can invest in plastic removals. So basically different projects that might not even have a carbon outcome. So that makes it a lot more flexible. And then the last one is probably the most flexible of them all. And we've only seen so far a small handful of companies doing it this way. But I think it's also going to become a lot more popular, and that's money for money. And that actually kind of just moves away from carbon. It's going more so, around committing a portion of your profit, for example, towards outside of your beyond value chain mitigation. So, for example, we've seen companies that say we're going to commit 1% of our profit to net zero. And that's the dollar figure that they contribute to global net zero. And that's the dollar figure that they contribute to this project. So like I said, no one method is necessarily better than the other. What is important is the companies carefully look at this, set the budget in a way that makes sense to them, and start going out there and providing financing to this project.
Thanks. That's been really clear. It's great to have also the visuals for these different ways of doing this. But now we've been focusing quite a lot on the voluntary carbon market as a structure. We're looking at the money. And now I'd like to jump sort of into the projects themselves a little bit deeper. And Robin, if I can come back to you here, what are we then looking at is the difference between removal, reduction, avoidance, and which ones should we be supporting when? If you could clear that up for us a little bit.
And I think this is also a question we get from many companies right now, right? Because there's so much confusion around it. A couple of years ago, no one talked about the difference of those technologies, right? Because if you have an offsetting approach, it does not matter so much if you kind of invest into a removal project or avoidance project, and you had the whole bunch of different technologies you can support and get carbon credits out of it. But with the initiatives like, for example, science-based targets or other carbon tax schemes or CORSIA from the airline industry, all of those mechanisms, they have different requirements on technologies. Do you need a corresponding adjustment? Do you a certain vintage, so the year when the emission reduction took place? And that's why also the market is moving into that status where you actually have to differentiate between the different technologies and what actually fits to you. But to your first question, maybe it's most visual if I give you some nice examples, starting with avoidance maybe. The famous RED project, for example, is a classic avoidance project. So RED project is avoiding deforestation. We know all that deforestation globally is one of the main causes of emissions. But if you prevent chopping down forests, then you also avoid emissions coming to the atmosphere. And then there are a lot of different direction what you can take. It's like you have unplanned deforestation, you have planned deforestation. But what we like so much about the unplanned deforestation technology is the impact you are having, because many communities and people in the global south, they are not doing or they are not deforesting their areas because they just like to do it. It's most of the times in need because they need more land. The population is growing. They have degraded agricultural lands. They just need to earn money for their families. So what are they doing? They go to the forest. They sell high valuable timber products. They also produce illegally charcoal from the forest, and step by step you have a degraded forest, and in the end it's like most of the forests then actually disappear. So it's not about telling those communities you're not allowed to do deforestation anymore. It's really providing alternatives. You provide jobs, you provide improved agriculture, you provide sustainable harvesting of the forest, so that you actually prevent the deforestation of native forests, which is like a great example. And this is unfortunately also a technology which came into much criticism in the last couple of years, but it's such a valuable technology, and it has so much impact, because protecting forests is always better than letting forests deforested and then actually pay a lot of money to reforest those areas again, right? It's much cheaper, you have much impact, it doesn't take so long. So this is maybe why avoidance credits and avoidance projects are super valuable to avoid emissions globally. reduction project. It's like the name says, it's about reducing carbon emission. It's if we look, for example, mainly in industrial projects, but also in the social impact space. You have, for example, a cook stove project where you provide a improved technology to communities, to households, and with this technology, they emit actually less carbon. And this difference from the baseline where they cooked over on a 3-stone fire, open fire, they used a lot of charcoal, firewood, by providing more efficient technologies like improved cook stoves or even a cook stove based on other technologies, you prevent pretty much the generation of emissions from those cooking habits. In the end, it's the same, but we see a reduction of 40 to 60% by providing those cook stoves, which has a massive impact in the global south. And this is the nice thing about those projects. It's not about only the reduction of carbon, it's also you're improving the health, you're improving the living standard of the families, because they don't have to spend so much money anymore on firewood or spend a lot of time on collecting firewood. And in the end, you also reduce the pressure on forests because you just don't need so much firewood or charcoal anymore. And then the last technology where we talked so much already about it is the removal part. And this is like you plant trees, you restore degraded lands. You can store a lot of carbon in the soil, but also in classic approach is just to reforest certain areas, and the trees, while they grow, they sequester carbon from the atmosphere. And that's like a very classic approach. You do large-scale reforestation and you do something for biodiversity, you do something for the communities, because you provide a lot of work opportunities, but in the end, you also remove carbon back from the atmosphere into biomass or into the soil, which is the other two technologies are actually more preventing emissions coming to the atmosphere. What you actually need for your company strategy is really dependent on what kind of credits do you actually need for the initiative you're following. If you neutralize your emissions, then of course you need to invest or buy removal credits. If you follow a beyond value chain mitigation approach or some other schemes like carbon tax or CORSIA, it's not so dependent that you can support pretty much all the technologies, but you have different work requirements you have to follow. So it's really up to the strategy you are following. But we really emphasize that all technologies are important because if we only invest into removal projects, it will not bring us closer to our 1.5 or 2.0 goal. It's really kind of 5 minutes before 12. So we need all the technologies to support climate action and to support the reduction of carbon emissions in the atmosphere.
Great. I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I hear a lot from clients who are sort of focused or taking the guidance of science-based targets, and it's all removal. And it is not to say that that is the only way. And if that is absolutely what is required of you right now today, then of course go with the removal projects. But if that is not completely delineated in your current requirements, you have this broad spectrum open to you, which actually supports so many other sustainable development goals that really can improve the lives of people, providing jobs, these clean cook stoves, reducing pollution, and the cleaner air in their lungs, meaning better health, which in fact changes entire communities for the better. So there's so many different knock-on effects from the different kind of projects available. But now, Robin, I'd like to stay with you, because now you've explained, okay, so we've got our removal and our avoidance projects, but then what's the difference with the nature-based and the technological removal solutions? What's going on there, and what are the key differences we need to take into account? And again, where do we invest?
And it's pretty much a very similar answer to the question before. It's really up to the companies. It's like about if you are a technology agnostic company, it's really about maybe you have locations in the global south where you want to support projects in the area. So does not matter so much which technology in the removal space you're supporting. We need all the technologies to fight climate change in the end. And nature gives us a perfect opportunity to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. It's what Mother Earth is doing pretty much forever, sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. So it's a very, very efficient system, and therefore it's also a much cheaper system than compared to technical removals, which are like still in a very early stage of development. We see a lot of money flowing into those technologies. We see a lot of startups investing into different technologies in the technical removal space, which is great, right? Because in the end, we need everything, but we should also not forget what we like so much about nature-based solutions is the impact what those technologies provide to communities, to people, and to biodiversity. It's not only about the carbon; it's really about the impact we can have on the people living in the area, which is tremendous, and also on biodiversity. This just must said, this with technology removals, which are often in the global north, a lot of like money going into those. It's really about the carbon then, which is sequestered and stored underground. But in the end, there's no right or wrong in supporting each of technologies. It's really more what fits to you. And the nice thing about the voluntary carbon market is you don't have to support only one technology, right? You can provide finance to a technical removal solution, but you can also sequester parts of your carbon in nature-based solutions. So this is, I think, the nice topic. You don't have to decide what you want to do. You can really take multiple approaches, which also fits to your company and to your employees, what they actually like to have.
Yeah, exactly. Just like in the stock market, we don't put all of our eggs in the same basket. Here as well, it makes sense to have a project portfolio that we are supporting, and you can choose numerous different technologies. And as I always say, share the love a little bit and spread that all around. Now, in the interest of time, I see we're running out of the hour. I've got a video here that is just over 1 minute that we'd really like to share with you, because this is something brand new that Climate Partners just released to really talk about what Alena was showing you earlier about this graph. You know, as you are reducing and you are making exemplary progress in your company, reducing on 10 or 20% of emissions per year, what are you doing about the other 90 or 80% that you haven't reduced yet? And we're calling this the other half. And this other half lands up accumulating in the atmosphere until you're finally reaching your net zero. So when you are following certain compliance regulations that are out there, you might not be required legally yet to be supporting the voluntary carbon market. But do you honestly enjoy doing only half a job? Does your company do half a job when they do anything? Or how do you really look at addressing everything that you are responsible for? So let's take a quick look at this video, and then I hope that a few of you can stay over time with us to address a couple of your questions. Thanks. Great. I hope you all are ready to get that whole job done, and see through the discussion that we've had today the amazing possibilities that are open to you, the huge improvements happening in the voluntary carbon market, the mechanisms in place, the different kinds of technologies you can be supporting, and what is available to you. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. For those who can stay, we're going to take 1 or 2 questions, and to the rest of you, thank you so much. Our first question that I would like to take a look at here is a very interesting one. Sofia, if you could help us with this one. In which country can the carbon credits from the VCM qualify for the carbon tax? Can you walk us through this a little bit?
I can. I can't provide a comprehensive answer, but I can provide a brief answer. There are 2 examples that I can give from the top of my mind where you can do this. South Africa is one example, and Singapore is one example, where you can use carbon credits from the voluntary carbon market towards your tax. However, in these 2 countries, and also in other places where it's possible to use these type of mechanisms, obviously there are regulations in place that tell you to what extent and what you can use. So if you are placed in one of those countries and you would like to use voluntary carbon markets towards your carbon tax, you still have to look in detail what the regulations in your jurisdiction say. So for example, the regulations can limit exactly which type of carbon credits you can use. For example, they can be limited to specific countries or specific technologies or methodologies. And they also limit how much of your carbon tax you can actually cover with carbon credits, because most of the time you can't cover your entire tax, but only a small portion.
Great, thanks for that input. I think that definitely helps there. I've got 1 or 2 others. Robin or Alena, have you spotted a question you are burning to answer right away, or shall I jump into this next one here?
I have a really good question that I'd love to answer. The question is, how do I get involved and how do I choose the company to work with? I think it's a really, really great question. And I think there's so many options out there on the market at the moment. You can work directly with a project developer, such as ClimatePartner Impact, for example, and that ensures that the most of your money actually goes towards the project and the impact. You could talk to Oria in our parent company, ClimatePartner, and ClimatePartner has a portfolio of different developers, including us, but basically every technology, every region you can think about. And that's another option. There are many retailers out there like that. You could work with an online provider that is like an online marketplace where you just go on and choose your credits. You could work with a consultant. There's some really knowledgeable consultants popping out in the market that can help you develop your whole carbon strategy. And in the end, I think what's important is not who you work with, but the fact that you do get involved in this market and you do make an impact, because as Robin has mentioned, we urgently need funding for these projects. I mean, nature-based solutions alone can provide 33% of all the cost-effective and efficient climate mitigation between now and 2030. But we have billions of dollars of funding gap to do that. And I think as private sector, we really need to step up there. So that's my answer to that. I don't know if Sofia or Robin, you have anything to contribute, or maybe you've got another question that you're really excited about.
I have one here that I would like to aim at Robin, and let's make that our last one for the day. Let me paraphrase a rather long one here. Basically, what is the case for investing in developing your own project versus buying credits from the carbon market? Robin, could you help us? When would you do one and when would you do the other?
So if you are a company having a long-term strategy, then it of course makes sense to invest into your own project, because you have pretty much a price stability. You can have like kind of a volume stability in the long term, because this is also what Alena said before. It's like we see the market significantly growing, but to do those projects, especially in the removal space, is super hard, right? It's not about I put in $1 million into project and then everything just come by itself. Those projects is a lot of work. And that's why if you have a strategy in place for the next 10, 20 years, then it's of course more advisable that you invest into your own project. If you need credits in the short term because you want to offset your emissions or you want to do a contribution approach, then project development would not help you so much because it's more like directed in long term. Then you should actually buy credits from the market to fulfill that goal. So it's pretty much also where you stand currently.
All right, great. Thanks for that. All right, then a big thank you to the whole team for sharing your expertise and your experience with us today. I think we've been able to cover quite a lot of questions that we've had from you guys that we've received beforehand and also live here. Lovely to be able to have this sort of discussion. Please know that we are always here for these kind of discussions. ClimatePartner Impact want to take your questions, want to have conversations with you, and we are very open to continuing these kind of conversations one-on-one. So find us on LinkedIn, follow the latest developments that we have there, get hold of us directly to continue having conversations with us. And we would very much like to, as Robin has often said, it depends on your situation, it depends on your needs, exactly which project you're going to choose, which method of investment you're going to choose, and how much and when to do that. So feel free to get hold of us, and we are here to take all your questions. But let's just take away a final message with us today, is that with all of the improvements, with the development on the voluntary carbon market, in these amazing projects that are happening, they are a necessary mechanism that even the COP is saying we need to get this money from where it is to where it needs to go. The budget that was agreed on between all the countries is not enough, and we need the private sector to step up to make sure that the future that we all want becomes a reality. So thanks to all of you for attending, and see you again next time.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.